Traveling from St. Petersburg to the Crimea, Colonel Voznitsyn of the General Staff made a deliberate point of stopping for 2 days in Moscow, the city of his childhood and youth. It is said that intelligent animals, sensing the approach of death, wander through all the familiar, beloved corners of their home, as if bidding them a final farewell. Imminent death did not threaten Voznitsyn. At 45, he was still a robust, well-preserved man. Yet in his tastes, his feelings, and his outlook on the world, a subtle shift was taking place, an imperceptible leaning toward old age. The circle of his joys and pleasures had narrowed of its own accord. A certain wariness and skeptical mistrust had crept into all his actions. That instinctive, wordless, primal love for nature had withered away, replaced by a refined savoring of beauty. The charming allure of a woman no longer stirred him with that restless, piercing excitement. But most significantly, the first sign of spiritual wilting, the thought of his own death had ceased to arrive with its former carefree and light fleetingness. Previously, it had felt as though someone else entirely, some other man named Voznitsyn, was destined to die sooner or later. Now, however, death appeared in a heavy, sharp, cruel, and relentless clarity, a clarity that made the hair on his head grow cold at night and caused his heart to sink in fear. And so, he felt a longing to visit his old haunts one last time. He wished to revive in his memory those dear, achingly tender recollections of childhood, shrouded in poetic melancholy. He sought to prick his soul with the sweet pain of that lost, irrecoverable purity and the vividness of life's first impressions. He did exactly that. For 2 days, he drove about Moscow, visiting his old nests. He stopped at the boarding school on Gorokhovoy Pole, where from the age of 6 he had been raised under the guidance of school dames according to the Frobel system. Everything there had been remodeled and rebuilt. The boys' section no longer existed, but in the girls' classrooms there still lingered that pleasant, inviting scent of fresh varnish on the ashwood desks and benches. There was also that wonderful mingled aroma of treats, especially apples, which, just as before, were kept in a special locked cupboard. Later, he turned toward the cadet corps and the military academy. He also visited a house church in Kadrino, where, as a young cadet, he had served in the altar. He remembered handing the censer to the priest and stepping out in his vestment with a candle for the gospel during the liturgy. Yet, he also remembered stealing wax candle ends, finishing the teplota, wine after the communicants, and making faces to provoke the giggling deacon. For such antics, he had once been solemnly banished from the altar by the priest, a majestic, stout old man who bore a striking resemblance to the Lord Sabaoth. He deliberately walked past all the houses where he had once experienced his first naive, adolescent yearnings of love. He entered courtyards, climbed staircases, and recognized almost nothing. So much had been rebuilt and altered over a quarter of a century. Yet, with surprise and bitterness, Voznitsyn noticed that his soul, hollowed by life and grown callous, remained cold and unmoved. It did not reflect that old, familiar sorrow for the past, that light, quiet, pensive, and submissive sorrow. Yes, 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 it is old age, he whispered to himself, nodding his head sadly. Old age, old age. There is nothing to be done. After Moscow, business forced him to stop in Kiev for a day, and he arrived in Odessa at the beginning of Passion Week. However, a prolonged spring storm had broken out at sea. Voznitsyn, who suffered from seasickness even in the lightest swell, did not dare to board the ship. It was only by the morning of Holy Saturday that the weather turned calm and windless. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the steamer Grand Duke Alexei pulled away from the pier of the practical harbor. No one came to see Voznitsyn off, and he was quite pleased by this. He could never stand the slightly hypocritical and always taxing comedy of a farewell. Standing by the rail for half an hour for God knows what reason, smiling tensely at the people standing mournfully below on the pier, shouting occasional, pointless phrases in a theatrical voice, and finally breathing a sigh of relief as the ship began its heavy, slow departure. There were very few passengers that day, and even then, most were traveling in third class. In first class, as the steward reported to him, the only passengers besides Voznitsyn were a lady and her daughter. Splendid, the officer thought with relief. Everything promised a peaceful and comfortable voyage. His cabin was excellent, large and bright, with 2 sofas set at a right angle and no upper berths above them. The sea, which had calmed overnight after the heavy swells, was still simmering with a fine, frequent ripple, but the rolling had stopped. By evening, however, the air on deck grew brisk. That night, Voznitsyn slept with his porthole open, falling into a sleep so deep he had not known for many months, if not years. In Eupatoria, he was awakened by the clatter of steam winches and the sound of scurrying feet on the deck. He washed quickly, ordered tea, and went topside. The steamer stood at anchor in a semi-transparent, milky pink mist, pierced by the gold of the rising sun. In the distance, the flat shores showed a faint yellow glint. The sea lapped quietly against the ship's hull. There was a wonderful scent of fish, seaweed, and tar. From a large barge moored tightly alongside the Alexei, bales and barrels were being transferred. Lower away. Heave away. Slow now. Stop. The command words rang out clearly in the crisp morning air. When the barge cast off and the steamer got underway, Voznitsyn went down to the dining saloon. A strange sight awaited him there. The tables, arranged in a large U shape along the walls, were gaily and colorfully adorned with fresh flowers and laden with Easter delicacies. Whole roasted lambs and turkeys held their unsightly, bare skulls high on long necks, supported from within by invisible wire rods. These thin necks, curved like question marks, swayed and trembled with the vibrations of the moving ship. It seemed as though some strange, prehistoric creatures, like the brontosaurs or ichthyosaurs seen in old illustrations, were reclining on large platters with their legs tucked under them, peering around with a fussy and comical caution, bowing their heads low. Meanwhile, round, bright columns of sunlight streamed through the portholes, gilding patches of the tablecloth, turning the colors of the Easter eggs into purple and sapphire, and igniting the hyacinths, forget-me-nots, violets, wallflowers, tulips, and pansies with living fire. A lady, the only other first-class passenger, came into the salon for tea. Voznitsyn cast a quick, passing glance at her. She was neither beautiful nor young, but she possessed a well-preserved, tall, and slightly full figure. She was simply and tastefully dressed in a loose, light gray sack coat with silk embroidery on the collar and sleeves. Her head was covered by a light blue, almost transparent, gauze scarf. She was drinking tea while reading a book, most likely a French one, Voznitsyn decided, judging by its compact size, format, and canary-colored binding. Something hauntingly familiar, something from a very long time ago, flickered before Voznitsyn. Not so much in her face as in the turn of her neck and the lift of her eyelids when she glanced up at him. But this subconscious impression vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Soon it grew warm, and the deck beckoned. The passenger went upstairs and sat on a bench on the leeward side. She alternated between reading and resting the book on her knees to gaze at the sea, the tumbling dolphins, and the distant reddish, layered cliffs covered with a thin mantle of green. Voznitsyn paced the deck, circling the first-class cabin. Once, as he passed the lady, she looked at him intently again with a sort of questioning curiosity, and once more it seemed to him that they had met somewhere before. Little by little, this sensation became restless and persistent. Most importantly, the officer could tell that the lady was experiencing the very same thing. Yet his memory remained stubborn, no matter how he strained it. Suddenly, as he drew level with her for the 20th time, he stopped, almost unexpectedly even to himself. He touched his fingers to his cap in a military salute and, with a slight clink of his spurs, said, "Forgive my boldness, but I am plagued by the thought that we are acquainted, or rather, that we were acquainted a very long time ago." She was not at all beautiful, a browless blonde, almost red-haired, with streaks of gray visible only from a distance, white lashes over blue eyes, and fading, freckled skin. Only her mouth remained fresh, rosy and full, traced with exquisitely curved lines. "I feel the same. Imagine that. I have been sitting here wondering where we have seen each other," she replied. "My name is Lyubov. Does that mean anything to you?" "Unfortunately, no. And my name is Voznitsyn." The lady's eyes suddenly sparkled with a merry and so familiar a laugh that Voznitsyn felt he was on the very verge of recognizing her. "Voznitsyn? Kolya Voznitsyn?" she cried out joyfully, reaching out her hand. "Do you really not know me even now? Lyubov is my married name. But no, think. Remember, Moscow, Povarskia Street, Borisoglebsky Lane, the church house. Well, remember your comrade from the Corps, Arkasha Yurlov." Voznitsyn's hand, holding hers, trembled and tightened. A sudden flash of memory almost blinded him. "Good Lord, is it really Lenochka? Forgive me. Elena, Vladimirovna, you forgot. And you are Kolya, that same awkward, shy, and touchy Kolya. How strange. What a strange meeting. Do sit down, please. I am so glad." "Yes," Voznitsyn murmured, repeating an old cliché. "The world is so small after all that everyone is bound to meet eventually. Now, tell me everything about yourself. How is Arkasha? And Alexandra Milievna? And Olechka?" While at the Corps, Voznitsyn had become close friends with one of his comrades, Yurlov. Every Sunday, unless he was restricted to barracks, he would visit Yurlov's family. During Easter and Christmas, he often spent the entire holidays there. Before entering the military academy, Arkasha fell gravely ill, and the Yurlovs had to move to the countryside. From that time on, Voznitsyn lost sight of him. Many years ago, he had heard in passing that Lenochka had been engaged to an officer for a long time, an officer with the peculiar name of Zenishek, with the accent on the first syllable, who had somehow senselessly and unexpectedly shot himself. "Arkasha died at our country estate in 1890, Lyubov was saying. It was a sarcoma of the head. Mother survived him by only a year. Olechka finished her medical courses and is now a district doctor in the Serdobsky district. Before that, she was a medical assistant at our place in Zmykino. She never wanted to marry, though there were suitors, and very decent ones at that. I have been married for 20 years, she smiled with sadly compressed lips, the corner of her mouth twitching. An old woman now. My husband is a landowner, a member of the local board. He doesn't reach for the stars, but he is an honest man, a good family man, not a drinker, not a gambler, and not a profligate like everyone else around here. For that, thank God. And do you remember, Elena Vladimirovna, how in love with you I once was? Voznitsyn suddenly interrupted her. She laughed, and her face seemed to grow younger instantly. For a moment, Voznitsyn noticed the gold glimmer of numerous fillings in her teeth. What nonsense! Just a boyish infatuation. And besides, it's not true. You weren't in love with me at all, but with the Sinelnikov girls, all four of them in turn. When the eldest got married, you prostrated your heart at the feet of the next one in line. Uh-huh. So you were a little jealous of me after all? Voznitsyn remarked with playful self-satisfaction. Not in the least. To me, you were like Arkasha's brother. Later, perhaps, when we were about 17, I felt a bit piqued that you had played me false. It's funny, you know, but girls have a woman's heart too. We might not love a silent admirer at all, yet we feel jealous of them. But enough of that. Tell me instead, how have you been and what have you been doing? He spoke of himself, the academy, his career on the staff, the war, and his current service. No, he had never married. At first, he was deterred by poverty and the responsibility of a family, and now it was too late. There had been, of course, various infatuations and serious romances. Then the conversation trailed off, and they sat in silence, looking at each other with tender, misty eyes. In Voznitsyn's memory, the past, separated by 30 years, flickered by in a rapid blur. He had met Lenochka before they were even 11 years old. She had been a thin, capricious girl, a provocateur and a telltale, playing with her freckles, long arms and legs, pale lashes and red hair, from which thin, straight wisps were always breaking loose to dangle along her cheeks. 10 times a day, she, Voznitsyn, and Arkasha would quarrel and reconcile. Sometimes there were even scratches. Alechka kept her distance. She was always noted for her good behavior and level-headedness. During the holidays, they all went together to dance at the nobility assembly, to theaters, the circus, and skating rinks. Together they arranged Christmas trees and children's plays, dyed eggs for Easter, and dressed up for Christmas. Often they would wrestle and romp about like young puppies. 3 years passed in this way. Lenochka, as usual, went away for the summer with her family to Zmykino. When she returned to Moscow in the autumn, Voznitsyn, seeing her for the first time, stared in wide-eyed, open-mouthed astonishment. She was still plain, yet within her was something more exquisite than beauty. That rosy, radiant flowering of early maidenhood which, by some miracle, arrives suddenly. In just a few weeks, it had transformed yesterday's awkward girl, clumsy as a growing Great Dane with oversized hands and feet, into a charming young woman. Lenochka's face was still flushed with a deep country tan, beneath which one could feel the hot, joyous pulse of her blood. Her shoulders had rounded, her hips had become defined, her breasts took on firm, precise contours, and her whole body had become supple, lithe, and graceful. Their relationship changed almost instantly. It happened one Saturday evening, just before the vigil, when Lenochka and Voznitsyn, growing rowdy in the half-light of the room, began to wrestle. The windows were still open, and from the garden came the clear, autumn freshness and the thin, vinous scent of fallen leaves. Slowly, stroke by stroke, the sparse, melancholic tolling of the great bell from the Borisoglebskaya church drifted in. They wound their arms tightly around one another in a crosswise embrace, locking hands behind each other's backs. They pressed their bodies close, breathing into each other's faces. Suddenly, blushing so vividly that it was noticeable even in the blue twilight of the evening, Lenochka lowered her eyes and whispered, abruptly, angrily, and with embarrassment, "Leave me. Let go. I don't want to." And she added, with a sharp look from her moist, sparkling eyes, "Nasty boy." The nasty boy stood there, his trembling hands hanging down awkwardly at his sides. In truth, his legs were shaking too, and his forehead was damp with a sudden sweat. He had just felt beneath his hands her slender, yielding, feminine waist, widening so divinely toward her shapely hips. He had felt against his chest the firm, supple touch of her high, maidenly breasts. He had inhaled the scent of her body, that joyous, intoxicating aroma of budding poplar trees and young blackcurrant shoots, the smell they give off on clear but damp spring evenings after a sudden rain, when the sky and the puddles glow with the sunset and make beetles hum in the air. Thus began for Voznitsyn a year of romantic yearning, of wild and bitter dreams, of failing grades and secret tears. He grew wild, becoming clumsy and blunt from an agonizing shyness. He was forever knocking over chairs, catching his hands like rakes on every unstable object, and spilling glasses of tea or milk at the table. "Our Kalenka has turned into a total bore," Alexander Milievna would say good-naturedly. Lenochka mocked him. Yet for him, there was no greater torment and no greater bliss than to stand quietly behind her while she drew, wrote, or embroidered, gazing at her bowed neck with its marvelous white skin and the light, curling golden hair at the nape. He watched as the brown bodice of her school dress creased into thin, diagonal folds and grew loose when she exhaled, then tightened and filled out again, so firm and roundly full. The sight of her naive, fair wrists and the fragrance of blossoming poplars haunted the boy's imagination in the classroom, in church, and even in the punishment cell. Voznitsyn covered all his notebooks and book covers with beautifully interlaced initials, E and Y, and carved them with a knife into the lid of his desk inside a pierced and flaming heart. The girl, of course, sensed his silent adoration with her feminine instinct, but in her eyes he was too familiar, too everyday. For him, she had suddenly turned into a flowering, dazzling, fragrant miracle, while Voznitsyn remained for her the same tousle-headed boy with a bass voice and rough, calloused hands, dressed in a narrow uniform jacket and overly wide trousers. She flirted innocently with acquaintance high schoolers and young sons of priests from the churchyard. Like a cat sharpening its claws, she sometimes took pleasure in scorching Voznitsyn with a quick, hot, and mischievous glance. But if, forgetting himself, he squeezed her hand too tightly, she would threaten him with a rosy finger and say meaningfully, "Watch out, Kolya, I shall tell Mama everything." And Voznitsyn would turn cold with genuine terror. Naturally, Kolya was held back for a second year in the 6th grade that season, and naturally, that same summer he managed to fall in love with the eldest of the Sinelnikov sisters, with whom he danced at the dacha circle in Bogorodsk. But at Easter his heart, overflowing with love, knew a moment of celestial bliss. He attended the Easter Matins with the Urilovs at the Borisoglebskaya church, where Alexandra Milievna even had her own place of honor, complete with a special rug and a folding cushion chair. But for some reason, they did not return home together. It seemed Alexandra Milievna and Olechka stayed behind to bless the kalichi and Easter cakes, while Lenochka, Arkasha, and Kolya were the first to leave the church. On the way, Arkasha suddenly and, no doubt, diplomatically vanished, as if he had swallowed by the earth. The two adolescents were left alone. They walked arm in arm, moving quickly and deftly through the crowd, overtaking other pedestrians, their young, obedient feet stepping lightly and in rhythm. Everything intoxicated them on that beautiful night. The joyous singing, the multitude of lights, the kisses, the laughter and movement in the church. And on the street, the throng of unusually wakeful people, the dark, warm sky with its large, blinking spring stars, the scent of moist young foliage from the gardens behind the fences, and this unexpected intimacy and lostness in the crowd at such a late, pre-dawn hour. Pretending to himself that it was accidental, Voznitsyn pressed Lenochka's elbow to his side. She responded with a barely perceptible squeeze. He repeated this secret caress, and again she answered. Then, almost soundlessly, he sought out the tips of her slender fingers in the darkness and stroked them gently. Her fingers did not resist, did not grow angry, and did not pull away. Thus they arrived at the gate of the church house. Arkasha had left the wicket open for them. To reach the house, one had to walk along narrow wooden footbridges, laid down against the mud between two rows of broad, century-old lime trees. But as soon as the wicket clicked shut behind them, Voznitsyn caught Lenochka's hand and began to kiss her fingers, so warm, tender, and alive. "Lenochka, I love you. I love you." He threw his arm around her waist and, in the darkness, kissed her somewhere below the ear, it seemed. His cap slipped and fell to the ground, but he did not stop to find it. He kept kissing the girl's chilled cheeks, whispering as if in a delirium, "Lenochka, I love you. I love you." "Don't," she said, also in a whisper, and by that whisper he found her lips. "Don't. Let me go, dear, burning, half-childish, naive, and unskilled lips. While he kissed her, she did not resist, yet she did not respond to the kisses either. She only sighed in a particularly touching way, frequently, deeply, and submissively. Tears of ecstasy ran down his cheeks, cooling them. And when, tearing himself away from her lips, he looked upward, the stars that dusted the lime branches danced, doubled, and blurred into silver spots, refracting through his tears. "Lenochka, I love you. Leave me be. Lenochka!" And suddenly she cried out with unexpected anger. "Do let me go, you nasty boy. You'll see, I'll tell Mama everything, everything, everything. I mean it." She told her mother nothing, but from that night on, she was never again left alone with Voznitsyn. And then came the summer. And do you remember, Elena Vladimirovna, how on one beautiful Easter night, two young people were kissing by the gate of the church house? Voznitsyn asked. "I remember nothing of the sort." "You nasty boy," she replied, laughing charmingly. "But look, here comes my daughter. I shall introduce you. Lenochka, this is Nikolai Ivanovich Voznitsyn, my very, very old friend, the friend of my childhood. And this is my Lenochka. She is now exactly the age I was on that one Easter night." "Lenochka the elder and Lenochka the little," Voznitsyn said. "No, Lenochka the old and Lenochka the young." Lyubova corrected him calmly, without bitterness. Lenochka was very much like her mother, but taller and more beautiful than the elder had been in her maiden years. Her mother's red hair had turned in her to the color of a roasted hazelnut with a metallic sheen. Her dark eyebrows were of a fine and daring sweep, but her mouth bore a sensual and somewhat coarse cast, though it was fresh and lovely. The girl grew interested in floating lighthouses, and Voznitsyn explained their design and purpose. Then he spoke of fixed lighthouses the depths of the Black Sea, diving operations, and shipwrecks. He was a gifted storyteller, and the girl listened to him, breathing through her half-open mouth, never taking her eyes off him. And the more he looked at her, the more his heart was shrouded in a soft, luminous sadness, compassionate toward himself, joyful for her, for this new Lenochka, and filled with a quiet gratitude toward the old one. It was exactly the feeling he had so hungered for in Moscow, only now it was bright, almost entirely cleansed of self-interest. When the girl stepped away to look at the Khersonis monastery, he took the hand of Lenochka, the elder, and kissed it gently. No, life is wise after all, and one must submit to its laws, he said thoughtfully. And besides, life is beautiful. It is an eternal resurrection from the dead. We shall depart, we shall decay and vanish, but from our minds, our inspiration, and our talent, there will grow, as if from the dust, a new Lenochka and a new Colonel Voznitsyn. Everything is connected, everything is linked. I shall leave, yet I shall remain. One must only love life and surrender to it. We all live together, the dead and the resurrected. He leaned down once more to kiss her hand, and she tenderly kissed him on his silvering temple. And when they looked at each other afterward, their eyes were moist, smiling with a look that was gentle, weary, and sad.